Chaim lechaim. Chaim lechaim levrocha. Good Yom Tov. It's an incredibly unusual time where the buzz phrase at the moment is social distancing and isolation and quarantine, all terms that imply separation between us. In the meantime, in the course of this Yud Alef Nissan, I had the opportunity to farbring in Johannesburg, Cape Town, Moscow, Sydney, Melbourne, London. The achdus that exists in the world right now, the ability to reach across oceans and across continents, is something which is completely unprecedented. There's no question about it that that's what we need right now. We need a tremendous sense of achdus. It's an incredibly challenging time, and it's an incredibly painful time for many of us. And as Rabbi William already said, Mamish, a very beautiful and powerful message. You know, when you hear about people who you know personally, who've been affected, either themselves or their family members, it's very difficult and it's very heavy and it weighs on us. Tavshem Memches, for me personally, the first time I ever saw the Rebbe was in Tavshem Memches. It's like almost like my whole opportunity to connect to the Rebbe began in Tavshem Memches. And in Tavshem Memches, Yud Alef Nissan, so the Rebbe spoke about the fact that Yud Alef Nissan is a day of Simcha. And he says specifically in the light of the difficult time, obviously referring to Chopei Shvat, to his own personal difficult time, so to speak. In spite of all of that, Yud Alef Nissan is a day of Simcha. And Yud Alef Nissan is the day that allows us the opportunity to take even the harshest Yerida and turn that into the greatest Aliyah. So by us joining Ba'achdus in an unprecedented fashion and by bringing across the world, and sharing and joining together, we have the opportunity to take even the most difficult Yeridus that we're confronting and turn them into the greatest Aliyahs. Rabbi William said, as I'm sure everybody thought, that today's Hayom Yom, the Hayom Yom Yud Alef Nissan, speaks about how a Yom Haledes is a day of his boidedus. As they call it today, bidud. It's a day of seclusion. And it's a day of introspection. So in today's world, when you talk about the concept of isolation, seclusion, it carries an incredibly negative connotation. But what you see in the Rebbe's framing of the concept, it's hein am levadad yishkoin, that we have the opportunity as in this seclusion, in this separation, in this quiet, in this introspection. Maybe we're not so used to it, particularly as Lubavitchers. We're used to being out there, we're used to being active, and we're used to touching people and interfacing with people and hugging people and saying l'chaim with people and bringing. So we're not really used to this idea of being confined to our own space, a stay-at-home instruction. I don't know how it is in the UK. Here in South Africa, we're on a 21-day lockdown. Mamash, stuck in your house until Achron Shel Pesach. They timed it very well. So we're not used to it. We're not used to it, and we could easily think of this as an incredibly negative experience. B'Hashgacha Pratis today, Yud Alef Nissan, the Rebbe shows us that a time of his voidus, a time of seclusion, could actually be a very powerful time. And it allows us an opportunity to pause and to reflect and to understand and to farbring. I was thinking 30 years ago, so it's almost 30 years, when Saddam Hussein threatened that he was going to send Scud missiles to Israel. And the Rebbe reassured us again and again and again that Eretz Yisrael would be the safest place on earth. So I don't remember the exact language, and perhaps I'm sure there's people in the Farbrengen who remember the exact Lashon. But when the first scuds, after the Rebbe had encouraged people that they should not leave Israel, and those who had plans to go to Israel should not cancel the plans, and that they would not need gas masks, and Israel would be the safest place on earth. So people, as we often do, interpreted that what the Rebbe was saying is there would be no missiles. So when the first Scud attack happened in Israel, initially the news reports were extremely negative. People, as journalists like to do often, they sensationalized and they shared information that wasn't verified, and they said that people had died and so on and so forth. And nobody knew what to say because the Rebbe had said it was going to be the safest place on earth. And I believe the way I heard the story is that Rabbi Grona, as I have for Shlema, also, what are you going to say to the Rebbe? The Rebbe said clearly that it's going to be the safest place. So he took a radio into the Rebbe's room with the news, and he put the radio, when the Rebbe came back from Mincha, from Mayev, I don't know what time of day it was, that the radio was playing with the news of this terrible attack that had happened in Israel. The Rebbe walked in, totally unfazed, turned off the radio, and said something to the effect of, Ich halt noch bei meins. I still hold by what I said. In today's world, living in seclusion only means that you are secluded from the people you normally see face to face. But the world, the outside world, can still very much invade that space. And in those days, it was just a radio, and today it's the internet and WhatsApp and a million messages a day, and this person's sending you this opinion, and that leading scientist, and this person says it's much worse than they say, and that one says it's much less than they say, and we're overreacting, and we spend an inordinate amount of time listening and engaging and indulging in all the so-called experts about what's happening with this virus. If we're going to be introspective on a day like Yud Aleph Nissan, perhaps the first thing that we should be introspective about is to turn off that radio, to turn off that noise. Today is Yud Aleph Nissan. Today is the day that we celebrate and that we connect with the Rebbe. That's the opinion. There's one opinion that we need to hear, one opinion that we need to connect with. What does the Rebbe say? This expert will disprove that expert, and the jury will be out, and they'll argue back and forth. We have, the Rebbe said, Roife Yedid and Roife Mumchim, whatever the medical authorities tell us that we have to do, that's what we have to do. Beyond that, there are countless letters where the Rebbe wrote to people who were unwell that it's not your business to do your own medical exploration. You go to the doctors, you follow their instructions, and beyond that, you work on your connection with Eibusha. You work on your bitachon. You work on your simcha. You work on your trachkut vetzayingut. But to become experts where every one of us is this statistic and flattening the curve and all these kinds of things, that's not for us. So Yud Aleph Nissan is an incredible opportunity for us to reflect on the Rebbe, to reflect on the Rebbe's message, to reflect on the fact that the Rebbe entrusted us with his message and he empowered us with his message. And he was absolutely confident that we could find his message and carry his message and live with his message and transmit his message. The very tired shliach here in South Africa, a good friend, Ashi Darren. Last night we had a shluch mitzvah bringing, and he brought up, and I looked at it afterwards, that in Tov Shemem Tes Yud Aleph Nissan, the Rebbe says something which is absolutely phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal concept. So generally speaking, there are a number of places where the Rebbe speaks about Yud Aleph Nissan and the concept of a birthday, obviously in reference to the Rebbe's birthday, that it's not a private affair. There's no such thing as a Rebbe has a birthday. And the Rebbe explains that the idea of Yud Aleph Nissan is something that relates personally to every single one of us. In fact, he compares it to the Korban Pesach, where the Korban Pesach, every individual brings the Korban, but nevertheless, it has the status of a communal sacrifice because everybody brings it together. So in a similar vein, the Rebbe says that Yud Aleph Nissan as a birthday, meaning, of course, the Rebbe's birthday, that's something that touches every single one of us. And that's a theme you'll find a number of times in Yud Aleph Nissan Farbrengens or Sichos. The Rebbe talks about how it is our day. But in that particular Sikh in Tov Shemem Tes, what the Rebbe says is absolutely revolutionary. And effectively, he says that the Navi Yecheskel tells us that Pesach is the birth of the Jewish people. So that we know, Pesach is the birth of the Jewish people. What the Rebbe says in that particular sikha is that the birth of the Jewish people begins on Yud Alef Nissan. He goes into explain it in a lot of detail. But the point that is relevant to us is that the Rebbe says Yud Alef Nissan is the birth of the Jewish people. He relates it in a ha'ara, in a note at the bottom, to the fact that during the first 12 days of Nissan, we have the Nasiim, the leaders of the different tribes, the Shvatim, who brought sacrifices in order to inaugurate the Mishkan. And the Nasi of Asher is the 11th Nasi, the one who brings his carbon on Yud Aleph Nissan. And the Medrash, which the Rebbe made famous, says that Asher, the reason he brought his carbon is to give praise to the fact that Hashem chose us. That Hashem chose us, the Jewish people, as his people. That's the birth of the Jewish nation. Yud Aleph Nissan is not simply the birth of a leader, of a Nasi. That alone, the Nasi, the Nasi, if it's the birthday of the Nasi, it's the birthday of everybody. But the Rebbe takes it a step further and says that this is the day of the birth of the Jewish people, the beginning of the birth of the Jewish people, and he explains it as follows. Yud Nissan, the original Yud Nissan, 3,300 years ago, as it was this year, was a Shabbos. The original Yud Nissan was when the Yidden, for the first time, had an impact that actually moved the Mitzrim, the Egyptians. It's a fascinating concept. Rebbe talks about another Sikha also. It's a fascinating concept that they had plague after plague after plague, and it didn't move them. That's Hashem's work. The Eibishter himself sends plagues to the Egyptians, and they stand their ground, and they're unfazed and they're unmoved. People always say, if something would happen, if there would be a miracle, then I would turn my life around. But here's a really good example. It doesn't work that way. They had plague after plague. The entire system of Mitzrayim was falling to pieces, and nobody moved. Comes Yud Nisan, Shabbos HaGadol, the 10th of Nisan, and the Jews start walking with lambs through the streets of Egypt, and the Egyptians go over to them and say, what's going on? And they say, look, our God told us that we should take these lambs and we should prepare them for 4 days, and on the 4th day we're going to sacrifice the lambs, and then Hashem is going to kill all of your firstborns, and then we're going out of Egypt. Suddenly, the firstborns are shaken. Suddenly, the firstborns feel that they have to do something about this. And that's why it's called Shabbos HaGadol, because there's this incredibly great miracle that happened, that the Egyptians turned on themselves, that the monster began to eat its own tail, that the leadership, you have to remember in those days, the firstborns, they were the elite of the society. So the firstborns, who should have been the biggest supporters of Paroi and the whole endeavor of slavery of the Jews, they turned against Mitzrayim. That moment, says the Rebbe, that is the moment where the world, as it was at that stage, Egypt, you have to remember, Egypt is not a place. It's not a geographical location. And Egypt is not just the superpower at the time. Egypt represented where the world was at in that phase of history. If Egypt said that this is how people should behave, then the rest of the so-called developed world said that's how you have to behave. And if Egypt decided that these are our values and morals, then those are the values and morals that became acceptable to everybody. And if Egypt said that the Nile provides us with sustenance, so you should worship the mighty Nile, and everybody worshipped the Nile, and everybody believed that Paro said that he was a self-made man. I made myself. The fact that Jews brought Egypt to its knees was not a national issue. It was a global issue. The whole world was about to change at that point in time. The fact that Jews were going to leave Mitzrayim, that wasn't a personal thing for the Jews, that now they were going to become a nation and find their own moral code and go off and establish their own kingdom. It meant the whole world was going to change. It meant that the code of behavior for all humanity was about to be introduced. Everything was going to change. So when did that happen? When was the world finally impacted by the Jews? When was the world finally impacted by the message from Avraham Avinu all the way to the Ashvi, Kol Ashvin Chavivin, to Moshe, to the special seventh one in the chain? When did that happen? Shabbos Hagodol Yud Nissan. Yud, the 10th. The 10th is a number that represents the shleimus, the completion, the wholeness of the structures that influence our world. The next day, Yud Alef Nissan. Yud Alef Nissan now is when the Jews work with themselves. Yud Alef Nissan is one step, one notch above the nature of the world. Yud Alef Nissan is the day the Rebbe says where we deal with the mehus ve'atzmus of a Jew, the essence of what a Jew is. Yud Alef Nissan is the birth of the Jewish people. So if we're going to reflect on Yud Alef Nissan, so we have to then reflect on what does it mean to come to the mehus ve'atzmus. What's the essence? What's the essence of who we are? What's the essence of what it means to be a chassid? What's the essence of the Rebbe? That's what we should be. Today is not a day to focus on details. It's not a day to speak about achievements. A lot of people like to be nostalgic and we tell stories and all this, which is all beautiful and it's all good. But today is a day to touch the essence. Here in South Africa, under lockdown, the rule is that you're only allowed to leave your house to get essential items. I don't know if it's the same by you. You're only allowed to leave your house to get essential items. Baal Shem Tov taught us that whatever we see, hear, or experience has to teach us something about our own lives. So this is a time in our lives where we have to only focus on essential items. Some people are calling it going back to basics, and they're singing the praises of how our world was too hectic and everybody was overworking and we were polluting the world, and now we need to take some time out and the planet has to breathe and we need to rebond with our families, and all these things are true. But from a Jewish perspective, this is a time where we have to connect with essential items, with the essence, with the mohus. What is the truth? What is the essence of what we believe? What is the essence of what we connect with? What is the essence of what the Rebbe wants us to be doing right now? To turn off the noise, to turn off the opinion, to turn off the media, and to hear what the Rebbe would tell us. And I don't think anybody, I'm certainly not going to claim to be an expert, the big mashpim and people who will farbring, talk about these things, but just a few thoughts that hopefully could stimulate a little bit of thought and a little bit of a direction. We know very well how the Rebbe told us that from the time that he went to Cheder, and even before that, he envisaged what the world of Mashiach would be. And we know that throughout the Rebbe's leadership, from the first Basi Lagani all the way through, there's not a single Jewish leader in history that was so focused and so fixated and so pushed, someone who pushed so hard the agenda of Mashiach. No question about it. And if we're going to talk about the essence, that surely is the essence. That surely is the essence. That, yes, as Rabbi Wilhelm said very correctly, aptly, it's an easy and very compelling thought that we could fall into to say, Mitzvah Hashem, life should go back to normal. Mitzvah Hashem, life should go back to normal. Right now, it's an aberration. Something's not right. The world is in a strange way. The world should go back to normal. That for sure not. To say it should go back to normal, like the Rebbe said, a Yerida has to be Tzarech Aliyah, has to be something greater and far more spectacular that is going to follow. So there's no question about it. For us, the essence has to be somehow related to Mashiach. So maybe a few thoughts that we could bring about and that we could think about. So what changed? What affected the Egyptians that 9 Makkahs were not able to affect? They went through everything. Their source of water dried up. They had family members who were killed in the various Makkahs. Nothing moved them. So what changed on Shabbos HaGadol? The Rebbe says that what changed on Shabbos HaGadol is that the Jews went out into the street And when their neighbors asked them, what is this business of walking with the lambs in the street? They had the guts. The Rebbe says they had the Mesiras Nefesh to tell them straight what's happening. And they said it in such a way that was Devarim Hayotzim Min Halev, which is Nichnasim Halev Poyalim Pulasam. They said it with sincerity. They said it with honesty. Now, sometimes, sometimes not so easy. We have to work on this. We have to work on it on ourselves. Sometimes just words. But what do we say? Hamanti ki adaber. That how does a person come to have faith? The Mechilta tells us that the Yidden left Mitzrayim, we left Egypt, in the schus of the faith that we had. Faith in the message of Moshe that we were going out of Mitzrayim. How do we create faith? Sometimes you've got to talk the language. You've got to actually say the words. And maybe if you don't meet it 100%, so it will start to grow on you. And if we don't meet it 100%, maybe somebody else will hear it and it will affect them 100%. I was talking to somebody the other day, because the world is open right now. People are feeling so insecure. People are feeling so shaken that they're open. They want to hear. They want to hear direction. I'm blown away how many people in our community who are not from people necessarily. You say one word to them about Mashiach, they say, oh, that's it. A guy says to me the other day, he says, you have to send me more information about Mashiach. I'm sure that what is happening in the world today is Mashiach. It's a person who is not Shem Shabbos and barely comes to shul. People are open. So the Rebbe says, what moved on Shabbos HaGadol, the original Shabbos HaGadol, is that people went out and they sincerely spread the message that we're going out of Mitzrayim. That what you're seeing around you is not stum. It's not just coincidental. It's not just that there's a collapse in the world. It's not just that the world's superpower has been brought to its knees. This is all part of the experience of leaving Mitzrayim, of leaving Godless. There are many questions that we have. Many questions. Somebody said the other day, I don't want this kind of a Mashiach. This is the kind of a Mashiach that we need, where people have to chas v'shalom get sick and people have to succumb. I don't know. No, none of us knows. We don't know what the Eibishter's intention is. But one thing we do know for sure is that the Rebbe's message hasn't been put on hold. When the Rebbe told us consistently that we are on an irreversible path to Mashiach, that we're living in the time of Mashiach, that all we need to do is to open our eyes, that the only shlichus, the Rebbe said, the kinnis hashluchim in Tavshin and Beis, the only shlichus that we have is Kabbalah's B'nei Moshiach, B'poel Mamish. Yes, of course we have questions, because we're not a Rebbe, and we don't see things, we don't understand, and we have our limitations, and we feel pain. But the Rebbe's message is not put on hold. The Rebbe's message is not deferred till we get through this crisis, and then when we get back to a normal situation, then we can talk about Ninyan and Mashiach again. This is the essence. This is what we have to somehow get ourselves to be thinking, and it's not easy, and it doesn't come easy, and we don't necessarily even want, even though, to be honest, how many of us, if we're honest with ourselves, how many of us have something so beautiful and compelling to look forward to, that should the whole corona thing end tomorrow, we'll be glad to go back to the world as we knew it. Humans are funny. We have a psychology that has a short-term memory. We forget how much we were complaining 3-4 months ago. We forget how we were going on about rising anti-Semitism and about the threat of economic collapse in various places and about rising unemployment in Israel and about terrorism and about the chinuch crisis and the shidduch crisis. It's a funny thing. We have a short-term memory sometimes. I don't believe there's anybody who could think of a reason that is compelling enough that would say, you know what, the thing to daven for is that we should go back to how life was before all of this started. What we should focus on and teach ourselves to focus on and speak to ourselves, a little bit of self-talk, to get in touch with the Rebbe told us that we are in the process of being megale, of unveiling a Mashiach, a Geula reality that is already in our world, and we have to open our eyes. In Tavshin Chav Ches, after the 6-day war, the Rebbe spoke about the pasuk V'hoya b'yoyim hahu yitaka b'shofar gadol, that before Mashiach comes, there'll be this great shofar, and the shofar will affect two kinds of people. One kind of person lives in Mitzrayim. These are the people who have tzoros in their life. Mitzrayim is a difficult place to live. These are the people who cry out and they wish for a better life because life is so difficult. And then there'll be another group of people. They'll come from Ashur. Ashur is from the Lashon Oisher. They live in a happy place. Life is good. Baruch Hashem. We've made progress. We live in liberal societies. We can practice as Jews. We live with a standard of living that was unheard of in previous generations. We have technology. We have healthcare. We have human lifespan that is unprecedented. We live in a world of Ashur, of happiness. Even that world will be woken up by Shofar Gadol, by some kind of events, a series of events that will happen in the world that will shake us and force and compel us to have to see things differently. And at that point, people will be open and they'll be ready to receive. And the only challenge will be to ensure that we share what has to be shared at that time. And one of the amazing things, Shabbos Bereshis, Tov Shin Chav Ches, one of the amazing things that the Rebbe says over there is this. He says that the Frierdiker Rebbe preempted this situation. There the Rebbe was talking about the 6-day war and how the Jewish world was so aroused to tshuva and to connection to Hashem, having seen the miracles of the 6-day war. But there's sometimes in a sikha, or in a fabrega, we kind of miss a little point. The Rebbe says there that the Frierdiker Rebbe preempted this 20 plus years earlier by speaking language and teaching principles that would help us to navigate the situation when it arose. There's no question that 30 years ago and 25 years ago, there's no question that the Rebbe spoke language that helped and gave us the thinking that we need to use at a time like this where the world is shaking and people are open and they want guidance. And we're looking for guidance ourselves. And people want to see positive. And we're living in an unprecedented time where there's a shofar gadol, there's something that's shaking and awakening and arousing people. And all we need to ensure is that we use the opportunity properly. The incredible timing when the Rebbe said, open your eyes, that we have to open our eyes to see that Mashiach is here. If we open our eyes, we see what is going on in the world right now. It is unbelievable. We're living literally in an unprecedented time in history. Unprecedented in the sense that for the first time in history, the whole world is affected simultaneously by the same threat. You know, people always talk about the world wars. You know, for us, they impacted us very profoundly, obviously, as Jewish people, victims of the Holocaust. I just think here in South Africa, living with 60 million people, 99% of which never had one family member who was even remotely affected by the Second World War. And that might well be true for other places in the world too. Today, we're dealing with something that affects everybody equally, but that's not the point. The point is that what's happening today is the world has pulled together to fight a common threat. Just over a week ago, the Secretary General of the United Nations called for, in his words, an immediate global ceasefire. You can only imagine what the Rebbe would say about the United Nations calling for an immediate global ceasefire. Yesterday, he made an announcement that more than a dozen serious conflict zones in the world have responded and have declared ceasefires. Global ceasefire. How many times did the Rebbe tell us that the United Nations has emblazoned on its walls the words of Yeshaya Hanavi, that they will overcome war? Like in Israel now, where they're using missile factories to create technology to help with the coronavirus. Where Tesla is making ventilators. Can you imagine what the Rebbe would say? Global ceasefire. The concept, the phrase was unheard of 3 months ago, 2 months ago. You know, in South Africa, we know that the Rebbe told one of the Elter Chassidim over here, Koppel Bacha, on the same day that Nelson Mandela was released from prison, he was by the Rebbe for dollars. And people were extremely concerned about what the future of this country would hold, because there was a lot of people saying that there'd be a civil war and there'd be an uprising and they would kill white people and so on. So Koppel Bacha was at the Rebbe And you can see it. It's on YouTube. You can see the clip. And the Rebbe says to the Rebbe that the Yidden in South Africa are worried. So the Rebbe says to him, they don't have to be worried because it will be good in South Africa until Moshiach, and then noch besser, even better. Okay, so a lot of people always joke about the fact that one day, if it gets a little bit better, you'll know Moshiach is here. Just 3 days ago, the BBC ran an article about how South Africa has emerged as one of the most successful countries in tackling the coronavirus, which is unheard of. You're talking about a country over here where to get consensus on anything is near impossible. And if you get the consensus, to be able to have the systems are so broken that nobody believed they could actually do something about it. And now, suddenly, the world is paying attention and saying, look at this. People are working together. There's a sense of achdus. There's a sense of trying to make people's lives better. They're not talking right now about stopping or flattening the curve. They're talking right now about an opportunity to turn the country around. They're talking about an opportunity to revive the economy. They're talking about an opportunity to bring law and order. It's a phenomenal shift. You speak to people now, everywhere, whether they're environmentalists and they're telling you how beautiful it is that the canals in Venice have cleared up and that you can see the sun over Wuhan, or whether it be people who, psychologists will tell you it's so valuable that we're spending quality family time together, or wherever it is, whoever you speak to, everybody is using the expression that after this, the world will be a better place. This is Mashiach language that is happening in the world around us. So the Rebbe said we have to open our eyes. We have to open our eyes and not fixate and focus only on the difficulty. How many times did the Rebbe tell us you look at the positive in a situation? For the negative, we have to scream. For the negative, we have to say Ad Mosa. For the negative, for the pain, for the suffering, for the illness, for the people who need a refuah shleim, for the people who have lost family members, there we have to storm the heavens and say Ad Mosa. It should not take one more day, this process. We're in Chodesh HaGeula, in Nissan, Asidni go, Kemeitzeis Chameretz Mitzrayim, all the language that we use, it's the same setup. Pesach is the same day of the week. Everything is ripe, everything is perfect. We have to storm the heavens. That should actually happen. And at the same time, we should be in touch with the Rebbe's message. The woman who comes to a shir here in our Chabad house, so she said to me, what does it mean that suddenly all the men have to stay home? So some of the women are saying they're trying to understand how come it is that the men are always absent for so long when it's time for bedtime and bath time and all that. And now they see how long davening actually takes, Mincha Mariv. They're trying to work out what happened. So she says, what's going on over here? So she says to me, could this be that we're told by the time of Mashiach, that feminine energy will be dominant? It's a fascinating concept, something to think about. But one thing that we can say is this. The Rebbe told us that Shabbos Hagadol Yud Nissan represents the impact on the world. We shluchim, spend our time impacting the world. Out there, challenging the world, searching for Yidden, trying to engage them, trying to fundraise, feeding people, whatever it is that we have to do. Right now we're fulfilling the Lashon HaPosuk that we say in the Lashon HaGodah, the expression in the Haggadah. What does it say in the Haggadah? It says that Pesach is the time where Hashem says, Ani v'loi malach, Ani v'loi saraf, Ani v'loi shaliach. This Pesach, it's with Ani v'loi shaliach. You know, the El Al has been practicing kibbutz galuyos so that we get a sense of what it's supposed to be, sending planes to Peru and to Australia, bringing back hitchhikers. All of these people who normally rely on a shaliach, what's the shaliach doing? Now we're at home. What does it mean to be at home? We don't know what it is to be at home. We don't know what we're supposed to be doing. The best we could do is we get on the phone and we call somebody and say, maybe you could put on tefillin because I can't come to you to put on tefillin, so you could put on tefillin yourself. And people are surprising us. They're surprising us how they're rising to the occasion. Motzei Shabbos, somebody sent me a message, Rabbi, I did it, I kept Shabbos. I didn't ask her to keep Shabbos. Out of the blue. Last week, somebody in our community said he's not a frum guy at all. And he tells me about a friend of his who he says is not a frum guy at all, so you can imagine. He says, my friend called me up. I was so moved, he says. My friend called me up and he says, I feel like I'm living Yom Kippur every single day. Al-Shiderim was telling us this morning, a member of his community, as soon as they announced 21 days of lockdown, immediately started a WhatsApp group called 21 Days of Tefillin. I'm sure that somebody will do a study and we'll see that those Israeli backpackers who normally only go to a Pesach Seder because they're out in who knows where and they feel they need that connection, I'm sure we're going to see a whole lot of them this year in their quarantine or wherever they're going to be, making a Pesach Seder, something they never did before. There is a groundswell from the bottom up. Somebody made a comment to me the day they told us we have to close the minyanim over here and close the shuls. Somebody came over to me and said, "If a Chabad, who would have imagined if a Chabad house could close?" I remember when we were in yeshiva in Chabad, and Mendel Futterfass heard that the yeshiva in South Africa had temporarily closed, and he said, "In Russia we never closed a moiset. Under Stalin they never closed a moiset. Something that the Soviet Union was unable to do has happened." So somebody said to me, if the Chabad houses are closed, it must be a siman that the shlichus is complete. The Rebbe told us in Parshas Vayetze, Parshas Vayishlach, Tofshin, and Nun Beis, that avodas habirurim is complete. It's a radical thought. Avodas habirurim is the fight, the battle, the conflict, like Yaakov and the angel, where you fight through the night, kicking up dust. The dust, which is the physical expression of nitzotzos. Nitzotzos, sparks, is spiritual dust that you have to kick up from this earth to connect to Hashem. That battle is done, the Rebbe told us. The battle for Judaism has been won. The battle for refining the world has been won. When they tell you that the canals in Venice have cleared up and you can see the bottom, it's a way of expressing that the Gani, the beautiful garden of Hashem, is becoming revealed. That's the Gashmias of it. Or when they tell you that there's goats roaming the streets of Wales and monkeys in the middle of the streets in Thailand, or here in Cape Town yesterday in the one area, Lungaban, they had thousands and thousands of birds that had never seen anything like it in their lives before. We're seeing cities in the world cleaning up, actually deep cleaning the cities of the world. This is preparing for Mashiach. Kabbalah's Pnei Mashiach. The Rebbe said the only shlichus left for us is the Kabel Pnei Mashiach. We're cleaning the world to be ready for Mashiach. We're sitting in our homes, so we should be in a good headspace and not the chipazon like the original Pesach, where we were rushed off our feet. That we should be able to gather ourselves and gather our thoughts and prepare our families, prepare those that we have an influence over, so we could be Makabel Pnei Mashiach. At the Kinnis HaShluchim this year, after the banquet, we were sitting in Farbrengen and talking about what does it mean to Makabel Pnei Mashiach. So we had this thought. If you have guests coming for Shabbos, so the whole Friday, especially if they're guests who you want to really make a good impression on, or if you have a large amount of guests, so the whole Friday you're frenzied. You're running, you're going, you're schwitzing, you conflicts with there's family issues, there's problems with shalom bayis, the place is on wheels. So much so that you don't want the guest, chas v'shalom, to walk in during that half hour meltdown that happens before Lichtbench. Once you're ready for the guests, what do? You don't run around anymore. You're not cooking anymore. You're not shopping anymore. To be makabel, play the guest. When you know your guest is arriving in 5 minutes, you want to make sure that you're calm, in a good headspace, looking like a mensch. So when the guest walks in, you're ready. The house is clean. The place is calm. You've got a smile on your face so that they don't feel like they're a burden. So the Rebbe told us that our avoid is the kabel pnei Mashiach. Kabel Pnei Mashiach, if we're not currently out there doing the typical mivtzoim, and we're not out there in minyanim and shuls and normal shiurim, so where are we? We're at home. We're in a place of being mekabel, being ready to receive. So I think this is what we need to bring about. This is what we need to think about. This is just ready to seed a little bit of thought and conversation about how we should be reacting. This is a conversation I'm trying to have with myself, because it's easy to say the words and it's easy to quote the sikhs. It's a whole different thing to shift our mindsets. And I think we might be battling a little bit to shift our mindsets. And we might be battling a little bit to consider the fact that Mashiach really, really is the reality. And we might be battling a little bit to think that it could actually happen now in the face of all this chaos. So that's what we have to work on. But the ikar is that we should be zoiche, whether we're ready or not. I think if there's one thing the Rebbe taught us, is that we don't have to be perfect, and we don't have to get it right, and we don't have to get 10 out of 10. We just have to try a little bit harder, a little bit more. And if each of us will sit down and pull out those sikhs and remind ourselves what the Rebbe said, and remind ourselves of the essence of who we are, and the essence of what the Rebbe represents, and mazoloi goiver, the mazel milosha noizel. Noizel means to bring from the highest level to the lowest level. Like the Rebbe says in the Alef Nissan Tashemem Ches, to bring from the yechida of each of us, which is the Mashiach within each of us, to bring it down into the Gashmias, the Matam Asar Tfachim. We should be zoiche, in fact, to see Malkeinu Mashiachenu, V'hu Yalichenu Kaimim Sla'atzenu. We should be in Yerushalayim HaKodesh for Pesach all together, and no more of the tzoros, and no more of the golus, and no more of the krippus, and we should have Mashiach now b'Pel Mamish L'chaim.